today we're going to take a look at the Guard versus NRG on Split that happened yesterday for NRG to qualify, and we're going to take a look at it from a more tactical side. We're going to show some rounds first, but then we're going to dive in pretty deep and get pretty nerdy with it, and really look at what the Guard potentially could have done to help them a bit more. But let's start by looking at some rounds that are going to give you, I think, a pretty good picture of kind of what was going on, particularly on Guard's attacking side, because that is where they really struggled. And first things first, we have to really take a look at the comps because they are very different. We only have the Raze as kind of a mirror agent, and then all the others are very different. And NRG are going with KO, Fade, Omen, and Chamber, whereas the Guard are going with Astra, Viper, Sky, and Sage. So basically, these comps are very different in terms of the way that they play. NRG are playing a very proactive comp, a comp that is going to search for those answers, search for that information, and then, use their utility to win off the back of that. Very proactive style. Whereas the Guard are playing a very reactive comp. They're going to be a lot more passive in terms of searching for those answers. They don't have nearly as much utility to try and find those answers. But then once they have them, they're then going to shut you out, right? With all the Astra and the Viper stuff and the Sage stuff, right? As soon as they know where you are, you're done, right? That was kind of how this was all going to work out. And so let's take a look at how it went. And actually, I think round 5 is a great place to start because it's going to show us the proactive side of NRG versus the reactive side of the Guard. So we'll see NRG's defense here, very proactive to start. We send out this KO knife here. We've got the Omen one way in B. And the Chamber is going to push down mid as well. So you can already see very proactive, right? We're being very aggressive, you might say, on this defensive side. You've got control of B main here. You've got these two players watching A, and you've got these two players aggressively pushed up in mid. This is a very aggressive early stance from NRG. As I said, they're being very proactive here. Whereas the Guard, as you can see, very slow, very methodical, being, very patient with it all, not running in or anything like that. They have this Viper Orb set up here on A. But let's see how they are going to do this. And let's just keep note as well of the Guard's sort of default stance with the Sage outside B, Viper towards A, and these three players towards mid, because I will be talking about that a bit later. But in comes another Omen one way, right? This Sage isn't going anywhere fast. And here we get the Sky, and we're going to get the Sky Dog. And in the Guard's comp, the Sky is really important because they really don't have much else in terms of initiation tools. You might say that the Boombot might help them a bit. The Raze Nade can push someone off an angle, but other than that, right, there really isn't that much. So, this Sky Dog has to find good value. And it does here because it sees that the Chamber is pushed up nice and early and the Chamber has to TP away. And that becomes a pretty big problem for NRG. They were in this very proactive setup, but now all of a sudden this Raze is on their own, right? Because the Chamber has TP'd so far away. So the Raze sends out a Boombot there, but has to be pushed back, right? And you can see that they cede a lot of territory because this Raze was on their own. The KO goes back towards A after the Raze didn't really see much. A flash comes in there towards Heaven to see what's going on, which I'll explain that is going to be a bit of a problem for them. And Trent, I think, played well on the Sky overall, considering, they got dominated. I think Trent overall did a pretty good job. But little flashes like that, they really are pretty scarce in terms of that utility, so you really have to think about how you're using it, and it will come in big in this round, because as we'll see here, they have these 4 players coming towards B now, and I mean, they're in a good spot here, right? Like, NRG have no control over mid, they don't know what's going on there at all, they're going towards the site with only 2 players rather than 3. This seems like it'll be a pretty good round for them on the whole. Net's coming back towards mid to maybe lurk up towards there. They wait for the Omen one way to drop and they get in towards B. And as I said, NRG have a very proactive comp. They don't really have much utility for stopping these kind of, once they're in this position, they don't have too much. But what little they do have with like the Omen Flash, the Raze Nade, you might say they have the Seize and the KO Nade. I mean, that's not much, to be fair. Overall on your team comp, but they're going to use it really well here, these 2 players, because in comes this second Sky Flash from Trent here. That blinds the Omen, but out comes a great flash from Hazed, and in comes the Raze Nade as well, and that really stops the Guard from pushing through. But I talked about that Sky Flash before that Trent used towards Heaven, and how, he perhaps needed to be a bit more frugal with his usage there, because now he doesn't have a Sky Flash. They've been delayed. But if he did have one, I think at this point they would decide to go, right? The Astral Wall is up here. The Omen's used his flash. The Razors used their nade. They don't have anything to stop you at this point. So I think if Trent has a flash here, the guard would decide to go in, right? I mean, they might sage wall that. The astral is up already, but they might sage wall this. They might choose not to be honest. But a flash and they would go, right? Sire would come blast backing in, all of that, and they try and just make this a 4v2 where the others don't have much utility to stop you. It should be a pretty favorable fight, but the problem is he doesn't have a flash. And if he doesn't have a flash, there is no real way that they can ever really get through. And so as we run this round forward and the rotates start coming in, also you might have just seen there the pulse from the KO ult. Ethan's going to KO ult there, and that's obviously going to stop them from even trying to go through this. And so they make the call instead to rotate towards A. And, well, now, obviously, this Omen has heard them rotate towards A. I don't think they know that, but it is. And this KO knife comes in here, and you can see that NRG have a pretty good idea overall, but now they have a problem that the time is obviously really ticking, only 18 seconds left, and the chamber has his ult. And so they're going to have to destroy the chamber trap, which they do, but if the chamber gets a kill with this little time left, it's going to be over because of the slow field, and that is exactly what happens. He does miss that shot, but now the slow field comes in. EU's already there on the rotate as well. He starts spamming them down as well. They're in the slow field, and NRG managed to get that round win. And so we see perhaps some of the problems that the guard were having there. You know, Trent having to be really frugal with how often he was using his Sky utility, and also, you know, some of the problems maybe with that default and the decision making overall as well, that kind of last second panic decision to go towards A instead. And now let's come to round 8, and the score is 7-0 to NRG, but this is a round that the guard managed to actually win. So let's find out how they do it. Well, we actually have a bit of a change in the setup from NRG. You can see we've got the KO and fade towards mid. Actually, the raise is on B. There is still the Omen one way there, but the raise is on B, and the chamber is towards A, and they've got this Viper orb here again. Do the guard from net there. But we're going to see a bit of a difference here in the Valen and Jonah P towards B main. They're actually going to bring Trent over, and they're going to decide to attack B main a bit more, because what Valen's going to do is he's going to put down this Astrostar, just quickly recall it, you know, just to kind of bait out that, hey, we might have crossed here a bit, so that Omen one way now becomes a bit pointless. I do think that this was kind of an interesting decision by NRG, because that Omen one way didn't get refreshed straight away. I'm not sure if that was intentional, or whether because, you know, the Omen isn't directly looking at it himself. But we have Som in this angle here, but Jonah P is going to be able to just find that angle on him and manage to get that kill. So they get the first kill, that's great, but now we're going to come back towards mid. Trent sees Ethan there, and he goes for a Skydog. And again, I've talked about, you know, Trent and his usage here, like, has to be maybe a bit more frugal, because obviously he knew that Ethan was there. Ethan just shoots the dog. They do send in this nice Sky Flash on EU, but as I said, NRG are going to be very proactive. You have to be ready for stuff like this. Ethan does really, really well. He manages to get 2 kills there, and then fades away again into the smoke, and they end up in a 4v3. Really nice from Ethan. As I said, kind of is exactly what they're going to do. The Sage comes back towards mid. I'll talk about this a bit later, and sends in a slow here, and gets a res off as well. And what we're going to see now is they're going to come and try and attack towards this fade in heaven here, who has to fall back a bit there. They start walking up a bit, and the Seas misses them there, and now we're going to get the Sage Wall towards heaven. And again, I'll talk about that a bit later. They flash in towards the site. They've got Net now coming back towards B to attack in B main. Sire does have the spike. This is maybe a little mistake that he was the one that picked up the spike after we had the death in mid, and so he does die there with the spike. NRG, again though, I mean, this kind of, you know, it does look like a mistake from this KO and fade that, you know, they just essentially have to guard the spike at this point. But again, they are playing a very proactive comp, and I think they just got in the mindset of playing that way. You know, they're up 7-0, but Net does manage to find Hazed in the smoke, and Trent manages to get those 2 kills as well of those 2 players running out of B main. And so the guard get onto the site. Tex tries to come up towards heaven, but he sees Sage Wall there, so he has to walk back, and this Sage Wall obviously very, very effective at this point. And eventually what's going to happen is Tex is going to walk out of CT here, and they're going to find this last kill as well and get their first round on the board. And I'll talk about some of the things that were different in this round to a lot of the rounds that they lost, but there we go. The guard managed to actually win a round. And now let's come to round number 9, and we're going to see much of the same stuff. The difference here, though, is we have the chamber up towards B main on its own. You see we have the the one-way up here from Omen already, and we have, again, the same setup from the guard. Everyone's in the same positions, and we're going to see a really nice Skydog come out from the side of Trent, where they get this nice dog. I love how he avoids this, and then, you know, gets a lot of space off it. One problem I would have here, again, with the guard is, you know, they have basically that Skydog is really important for them, and they don't follow up on it. You know, they could have taken some pretty good control there towards Heaven with it, but they decide not to. They decide to come back towards B instead. But again, they use this great little Astra Star here. They recall it. They create this question mark for Tex, and then Tex tries to go repeaking it, but then runs straight into Sire, who gets a really nice kill. So they get the first kill. Really, really nice. And they think off the back of this is a chamber op who often will play on their own, right? So this should be a pretty easy thing. But we're going to see some great utility out from the side of NRG. Again here, great little raise nade in there. And a Noma flash comes in as well from Hayes. Really, really nice delay. I like how they, you know, kind of do one and then the other, so it really, really stops them. In comes the Sage Wall, but then we get the Razor, and so they decide to run away from B main again. So they do stop the Razor from really finding much value. The thing is, they are about to run into a Buzzsaw, right? And EU here is going to win them the round. He is in a weird position overall. You don't generally expect anyone to be here, you know, for this, but maybe with the Razor, he knew that this was going to potentially be a possibility, and so they run straight into him. They aren't really watching, and he ends up getting 2 kills there for free, and we end up in this 4v3. But they do still have the Viper ult, and you know, they are going to get the spike down towards A. I'm not a personal fan how they use this Viper ult either, to be honest. You'll see what I mean when we get there. Jonah P gets a 1-for-1 there. That's absolutely fine for NRG. You see that they use the Viper ult towards this and not on the spike. In this situation, you know, where you were in a 3v4, now it's a 2v3, I personally would like to see the Viper ult on the spike. It's just something that, like they have to come to the spike at some point, but if they come around here and just tap the spike, then you're the one who has to do something. Whereas they don't have to even interact with this Viper's Pit if they don't want to. Because they're in a 2v3 as well, Valorant feels the need to try and push through the Viper's Pit. And the thing, I get it, you know, it's a 2v3, but now you just made this situation impossible, really, for Net to win in a 1v3. They have the Fade ult as well, which is kind of a nightmare for Viper's Pits on the whole, but I feel like a 2v3 with a Viper's Pit, you still have a pretty good chance of winning it. But the way that they use the Viper's Pit, and it just didn't really suit where the round was, to be honest, because NRG can just avoid the Viper's Pit overall. And we see there that Viper's Pit did nothing for them, essentially. So NRG do end up winning that round. But again, we saw some nice things from the guard, but again, they just get delayed, and they didn't quite have that utility to actually feel confident in actually pushing on towards the B site. But now let's come to Valorant and talk about what the guard could have done differently that I think would have given them some more success. And so let's start off with their default, and I've got it here for you with the Sage towards B, the Viper towards A, these 3 players towards mid, and why I really don't like what they were doing, and how I really didn't like that they didn't adjust what they were doing either. And the reason for that is let's start on A, right, with Net here on the Vipers. He was putting down this Viper roll, but the problem that he had is he was running into both the Fade and the KO. And so the thing is, if he ever did try and, you know, do this and lurk up or try and create some question mark, you're running into a KO and a Fade. Like, they're gonna know between the Prowlers, the Knife, the Haunt, like, they're gonna know how far you've pushed up. And so Net really never felt comfortable with pushing up on towards A or creating this question mark at all, to be honest. You know, in these kind of 5v5s, 4v4 scenarios, he just didn't feel comfortable doing it, which is fair enough, because they often would know exactly where he was. And so they really got nothing out of this Viper on A. They got so little, it was unbelievable. Then we come to the Sage on B, which, I mean, I'll get to a bit more, but the Sage on B, right? Jonah P can't beat this one way. He literally has nothing to be able to defeat this one way whatsoever. We saw in those rounds that they were using the Astra Recall Star when multiple people would come here, but for a lot of these rounds, that didn't happen. I showed you basically 2 rounds where it did, 2 out of maybe 3 rounds where they decided to do that. And so oftentimes, Jonah P would just sit here doing nothing. And so a lot of the time, NRG had full control of this, they had full control of this, and so often it was just a battle for mid. And as I mentioned in those clips, a big problem that they had was that it seemed that Sire didn't have a lot of those Nismo Boombot lineups that, you know, are going to clear a bunch of things. He, you know, didn't really have those lineups that were clearing everything. So that was a big problem for them as well. And that meant that it really all came down to Trent. You know, with his dog and his flashes, he had to do so much for them that it was an impossible task, really, right? Like, I'm telling him, oh, maybe you should be more frugal with it. But to be fair to Trent, it's not really his fault that, you know, he had to solo carry pretty much for this kind of initiation part of the round, because essentially that's what they had to do, right? And they weren't following his Skydogs and taking the control that maybe they got, as we saw in some of those clips as well. And so they just had a big problem that often it was coming down to mid, but they never felt comfortable in actually pushing behind these Skydogs either. That was a big problem for them on the whole. But I really want to talk about is this could have been fixed, I think, pretty easily, to be honest. And I don't understand why the guard didn't really change this, because if we just swap some of these agents around in terms of where they're playing, you can create a lot more pressure for the way the NRG were playing this map. Let me explain. So the Viper here on A, as I said, was finding absolutely nothing. But if we bring this Viper over to B instead, everything changes, right? Because all of a sudden, if you do this setup against this Omen one way that this Omen was, you know, pretty much relying on for the entire half, becomes useless, right? You just put up the wall and you walk past this one way. Done, right? So this Omen can't use this one way anymore. They have to fall back. But if you put up this Viper Orb as well, where does this Omen fall back without, you know, being on the other side of it, right? He doesn't really have a great position to go to. He can maybe come in this corner once, but I know some of you might be saying like, oh, well, you can just put the one way up here. But where does he stand, right? Where do you stand in like a super safe place where you know that you're not going to be spammed, or, you know, they're not going to Skydog and just like as soon as a Skydog comes through here and sees that you're pushed in front of this orb, they're just going to spam you and you're going to die. So he would have been in a pretty difficult position, this Omen, overall, and he probably would have had to fall back there, and this gives you then a ton of control, right? If you can threaten that you're all the way up here, that's a massive problem. We see straight away this Viper would have helped them so much on this B side, and Net would have had a much better game overall because he would have been able to do a lot more with this utility, and so it just would have really helped them if they moved this Viper over towards B. They would have had a lot more control. The second thing I want to bring up is, why is the Astra in mid? I think the Astra is in mid because Valen is the IGL and he wants to be with the team. I'm pretty sure that that is the reasoning behind it. But if you want to really play this map well, you have to put this Sage in mid, and this Astra has to be the one in A. Because if the Astra is here on A against these two agents, you know, that are going to be pretty proactive and looking for that info, the Astra can just sit back here. And that's absolutely fine because the Astras can still help you on the other side of the map. That's the whole point of Astra, right? So it's fine if we see this A main control and our Astra is just here watching for a push and helping our team out there. That's absolutely fine. And then the Sage makes a lot more sense as well, because now the Sage can actually use their utility in a useful manner, rather than just being stuck behind a one-way the entire round, right? We can start to run up here, and we can start to feel more confident with the Boombot and with the dog that we can start to take this space, right? If you're really worried about what happened in that round where Ethan pushed through vents and flashed through it, well, you can just Sage Wall it, right? You can put a Sage Wall here and really start to pressure towards this side, right? And with this Viper setup as well, this is a lot of pressure that's going to be coming towards this B side if you do that. Or if you feel comfortable with that and you maybe put a Sage Slow in there instead to stop anyone flashing through it, then you can come up here with the Skydog and Boombot and whatnot and the Raise Nade and all that instead. Maybe you push them back towards Heaven, and then you get up this Sage Wall. It's not a surprise to me that you know, the first round that they won was when the Sage was in mid, and they got the Sage Wall in this location, because that is so useful to this comp that really struggles in sort of advancing through the map on the attack side. It's no surprise to me that, yeah, you walled off a key location of the map, and that was the round that you won. This just had to happen, but it really didn't happen, right? The Sage Wall just never went into these locations for the guard, and that was such a massive problem for them, and they had to. You have to, if you're playing this comp, do that. You have to put the Sage Wall in those locations if you want to have a good chance at winning these rounds. But for whatever reason, they decided to put the Sage on B, and it just didn't work. And I think what's even more frustrating is it wasn't just that they put the Sage there, it was that they didn't adapt to what was going on from NRG. And I think with this setup instead, you can already see that it just makes a lot more sense, and it would have had, in my opinion, a lot more success for them on this map.